My name is Amanda. I'm 38 years old. I was the perfect wife for 12 years. Or so I thought. I met my husband, Nate, when I was 24. He was a promising lawyer at the time, full of ambition and plans to conquer the world. I fell head over heels in love. It was love at first sight. I was an ordinary girl from an average family, and he seemed to me like a hero from a movie about successful men. Stylish, self-confident. He knew how to get what he wanted. We got married quickly. I quit my job at a financial company because Nate said, "Why do you need this routine? I'll take care of us. You can take care of the house, the children. You won't have to worry about anything." At that moment, it seemed like the perfect offer. I dreamed of a family, of children, and I thought that having a husband who takes care of all financial matters is true happiness. I was happy. We settled in a big house, bought it on credit. Nate said that it was an investment in our future. I believed it. Then our first daughter, Bella, was born. 2 years later, our son, Oliver. I lived worrying about them, baking cupcakes for children's parties, taking them to dances and football, creating comfort at home. I was the same ideal wife from American movies. But over time, I began to notice that Nate was changing. As soon as his career took off, his attitude towards me began to cool down. He would come late. At family dinners, he could silently sit on the phone. He was more interested in business meetings, the golf club, the new Porsche he had bought, than our family. At first I wrote it off as fatigue. But later it became clear that he simply began to perceive me as part of the interior. I was the backdrop for his success, the woman with him, who should smile at events and silently serve dinner at home. My attempts to talk about it only caused irritation. "You don't understand anything about my job. Your job is home and children." "I earn money, I do everything," he often replied. I didn't know then that this was just the beginning. What lay ahead was something worse than just a cold relationship. What I would learn about real betrayal. And that my husband, to whom I gave my whole life, would still stab me in the back the most painful way. But then, I just continued to be the one he called a stupid housewife. And I had no idea that one day I would make him regret every word. I try not to pay attention to Nate's coldness. It seemed to me that this was just a crisis. Well, everyone has it, right? We've been together for over 10 years. Passion has dulled. Everyday life, worries, work, children have appeared. I justified him because I believed that it was necessary, that it was normal. But over time, the situation became worse and worse. Before, he would at least try to create the illusion of a family idol. Now, even that wasn't the case. He could come home at 11 o'clock at night without even asking how my day had gone. Sometimes he wouldn't show up at all, citing business trips. Although he had never had such trips before, I tried to talk to him. "Nate, we're growing apart. You've become different. Am I doing something wrong?" His reaction was always the same. "You don't understand anything. I work for our family so that you can live in comfort. You sit at home all day long. Your life is cartoons and soups. I'm tired of coming and listening to your whining." These words cut me. I felt worthless. I gave myself to the house, to the children, and in his eyes, I was just a burden. Cartoons and soups. That's how he saw everything. I did every day. One day I asked for money, for new clothes. My wardrobe had long since turned into a set of stretched t-shirts and old jeans. I felt bad among his colleagues, where women shone in expensive dresses. And why do you need a new dress? Who are you going to show off to? You're sitting at home. What are you doing? Buying a formal apron, he said, not even looking up from the phone. I swallowed my insult. But then I began to understand something. He no longer saw me as a woman. To him, I had become a faceless, convenient figure who cleaned, cooked, and took care of the children. I wasn't a partner. I was a servant. I began to notice other disturbing details. A new Rolex watch that I had never heard of. Checks from restaurants where I had never been. Expensive perfume. That was definitely not for me. Sometimes he smelled like women's perfume. And every time I asked, the answer was the same. You're making up nonsense. Mind the children, not your fantasies. I felt that something was wrong, but I was afraid to admit the truth, because it would mean that everything I had invested my life in
could turn out to be a lie.
That I could have given my best years
To a man
to whom I had become indifferent. But you can't hide the truth. And soon I understood it. I understood it so painfully that I will never forget this day. The day began as usual. Morning breakfast, getting the kids ready for school. I was making sandwiches for Bella and Oliver. And Nate, as usual, was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. I put his coffee in front of him. He didn't even look up, just mumbled something like, "Thank you." I was used to this indifferent attitude. It had been like this for a long time. "Do you have anything important to do today?" I tried to start a conversation. "A meeting with investors." "A big deal," he replied dryly. "Wish me luck." I smiled, although inside everything was tightening. "Good luck." He used to tell me about everything he did, shared his plans, asked for my advice. We were a team. Now I was a shadow to him, a part of the background that he simply didn't notice. After the kids left, I decided to check my email. I had a habit of occasionally looking through my financial statements because even though Nate handled all the money, I had a small personal account where I saved money. I opened the email from the bank, and my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. The balance showed almost zero. The account had a paltry $240 left, but it was over $150,000. I had been saving this money for years. When the kids were little, I would save everything I got in gifts or bonuses. It was my insurance fund, for their future, for their education, just in case something happened. I checked the transaction history. In recent months, large amounts of money had been regularly withdrawn from the account. $5,000, $10,000, $12,000. And the largest payment, $25,000, had been transferred just a week ago. The recipient was some private account that I didn't know about. My ears rang. This couldn't be a coincidence. Nate had done it. Only he had access to this account. And only he knew that I was saving this money. My heart was pounding so loudly that I could barely hear my own thoughts. I felt tears rolling down my cheeks, not from pity for the money, but from humiliation. It was a stab in the back. I had given this person everything. My time, my dreams, my youth. I gave up my career for him, and he just took it and wiped his feet on me. He pulled out the money that I had been saving for our children, as if I were an empty space for him. I tried to calm down. I called the bank. I asked for the details of the transfers, but they told me that the account was joint and my husband had the right to withdraw funds. Without my knowledge, legally, I couldn't do anything, but morally, I was shaking with rage. I decided that I wouldn't just leave it like that. Even then, I didn't know how exactly I would take revenge. But even then, something inside me broke. I was no longer that naive Amanda who endured insults and remained silent. I felt something new emerging within me. Something cold. Something strong. For the first time in years, I realized that it was time to act. And I would never let anyone devalue me again, especially the one whom I considered my closest person. I couldn't calm down. I paced the house all day, like a lioness in a cage. Every thought kept coming back to one thing. Nate stole my money. Money I had saved for our children. But that wasn't even the scariest part. I couldn't understand why. What had he spent such a huge sum on? I was afraid to even guess the answer. That evening, when he returned, I pretended nothing had happened. I had to be careful. I already knew that if I went ahead, he would simply accuse me of being crazy, saying that I was sitting at home and fantasizing. And I needed proof. Reinforced concrete. I served him dinner, smiling as usual, talking about the children, but inside, I was seething with rage. I listened to his every word, looking for any clue, and she appeared. I'll be late tomorrow, meeting with clients. He said in between. I noticed the name Jessie flash on his phone. A woman's name, and definitely not a client. I reassured myself not to jump to conclusions. I'd been waiting too long to snap now. I needed the truth. All of it. The next day, when Nate left, I decided to act. I remembered that he always left his old laptop in the closet. We used to pick it out together, back when we were married. Nate had long since switched to a new computer, and this one seemed unnecessary to him. But I knew that he sometimes used it at home. I opened my laptop. The password. Yes, his birthday. From the first time, my hands were shaking. My heart was pounding so much that I was afraid that the neighbors would hear. I opened my mail, and within a few minutes, a wave of pain covered me. I saw dozens of letters from a certain Jessica Blake. I clicked on the first one, and it hit me as if in the face. Photos. A young, spectacular blonde, in a swimsuit, on a yacht, in expensive restaurants. Messages. Thank you for the ring, my love. This weekend was the best of my life. I miss you when you're at home with that boring chicken. I couldn't breathe anymore. My hands went limp. I closed my laptop and sat down on the floor. I was shaking. I started to sob quietly, so that the children wouldn't hear. He wasn't just cheating. He was humiliating me. He was laughing at me behind my back, and was spending our money on a young mistress. After an hour of shock, I got up. I wiped my tears, and I realized this is the end, but not mine. His. I was no longer the housewife that he had mocked. I had become a woman with a plan, and now I would destroy him, step by step. Cold. No tantrums. No tears. I would show him who he had hooked up with. I would make him regret every word, every penny spent on her. And then I'll leave him alone, broken, bankrupt, and despised. And then he'll realize who he's lost. But it'll be too late. I've guaranteed myself this. I sat in the kitchen, staring into a cup of cold coffee. My heart was no longer beating with pain, but with determination. The tears had dried. I was no longer a victim. I had become a predator preparing to attack. I remembered all the years of suffering. When I kept quiet, when he insulted me with words, humiliated me in front of the children. And I continued to be a good wife, because I believed that was the way it should be. I remembered the moment when he said, "Your business is the kitchen and the children." Or when, looking at me in my dressing gown, he said contemptuously, "Have you seen yourself in the mirror for a long time?" All these phrases flashed in my head like red-hot iron, burning away the last remnants of love. Now only cold rage remained. I didn't just want to leave. I wanted to destroy him, take everything he loved from him, and leave him with nothing. I understood. I had to act quietly. Every step I took had to be unnoticed. Nate couldn't suspect anything. He was used to seeing me as weak. That was my advantage. He underestimated me, and that would be his fatal mistake. I started small. The first step was to find out about his financial affairs. I remembered that my late father worked in a bank, and he had a friend, Michael, a financial consultant. We hadn't seen each other for many years, but I called him. "Amanda, is that you? I thought you were already living in Europe with your husband. Your father was so proud of your marriage. What happened?" "I need help, Michael. I want to know everything about my husband's financial situation." Very quietly. "I understand. Well, okay. See you tomorrow." The next day, I put on something that I hadn't worn for several years. A figure-hugging black dress, high heels. I looked in the mirror and recognized myself. The girl who had once built a career, who was respected at work, who was confident in herself. I was no longer just a housewife. I was a woman going into battle. The meeting with Michael was productive. I learned that Nate's business wasn't as stable as he said. He had problems with the tax office, loans, some deals, on the verge of foul play, one more bad contract, and everything could fall apart. That was enough for me. Now I knew his weak points, and I knew where to hit. I thanked Michael, but I didn't tell him everything. I didn't want anyone to know what I was planning. This was my war, and I had to win it alone. When I got home, I made dinner, put on the same bathrobe, smiled at Nate, as I always did. "How was your day, sweetheart?" "It's fine," he grumbled. I knew his day was great, because he was with Jessica. I already knew everything about them. But now, when I looked at him, I no longer saw the man I loved. I saw a man
Who didn't yet know.
that he would lose everything, and that gave me strength. I was no longer weak. I became the one who would dictate the rules of this game. You said. The following days I acted coldly and cautiously. I turned into a shadow, invisibly penetrating Nate's affairs. I understood. Every step must be considered. Any mistake of mine, and he would destroy me, deprive me of everything, and leave me with nothing. At home, I remained the same gentle wife, whom he considered a stupid housewife. He did not suspect that every morning, when I saw the children off to school, I turned into a detective. I picked up the password to his work email. You won't believe it. It was the date of our wedding. Irony, right? I looked through his correspondence,
Contracts, bank accounts.
the whole picture opened up to me. Yes, Nate's business was on the verge. Everything was hanging by a thread. A couple of unsuccessful deals. And that's it, he was bankrupt. And I also found out that he paid Jessica a year's rent for the apartment. $18,000. He gave her a Cartier bracelet. $12,000. And he took her to the Maldives twice. And this was at the expense of the money that I was saving for our children. I clenched my fists. I read their love letters, where he called me Blue Stocking, and her his sunshine.
He wrote,
"A little more, my love, and I will leave this old woman, and we will live together." Then I looked in the mirror. Yes, I had changed over the years. I was a tired mother of two, but old. I knew that I could show him who I really was. The next step was to get to his accounting department. There was a safe in Nate's office. I had known where he was for a long time, but I never wondered what was inside. Now it was a necessity. I watched him carefully as he opened it. I saw that the code was our son Oliver's birth date. It was that simple. He didn't even think that I would dare to do something like that. The next day, when he was at the gym and the kids were at school, I opened the safe.
Papers, contracts.
Some documents that were clearly shady. I quickly took pictures of everything on my phone. I saved them in several places. I was ready. I now knew more than I needed to strike. I had financial irregularities, evidence of tax evasion, and some fraud that could get him in jail.
I didn't know yet
if I would use it all, but I wanted to be sure. If I had to, I would destroy him completely. That night, Nate came in a good mood. He must have been seeing Jessica. I set the table, smiled, asked, "How was your day?" "Oh, great. You know, you're such a great housekeeper. Honestly, I couldn't have done it without you." "Really?" I whispered, barely suppressing a sarcastic smile. "You're my rock," he said, never taking his eyes off the phone. Then I thought, "Oh, I'm your rock? You have no idea how quickly that rock will knock the ground out from under you tomorrow." And I went to bed with the thought that my plan was nearing its climax. I was ready.
for now.
I was just starting the game, but victory was already in the cards. And she was behind me. I woke up before dawn. Usually I let myself relax in bed after Nate left for work, but this time was different. I couldn't afford to be lazy. My plan required clarity, patience, and a cool head. I made coffee, watched Nate fuss over his stuff. He was in a good mood. I even noticed him smile, looking at his phone. Most likely it was her, Jessica. "What's so happy about?" I asked with feigned curiosity. "Just a nice day. Maybe we'll sign a big deal today." I nodded, feigning support. Inside, I was growing contempt. He had lied to me without blinking. But it didn't matter. Soon this good day of his will become the worst of his life. As soon as the door closed behind him, I picked up the phone and dialed Michael's number. "It's time," I said shortly. "Are you sure? This will set the process in motion. There's no turning back." I've been waiting for this moment for years. Yes, we're doing everything as agreed. Michael, whom I thought was just a friend of my father, turned out to be a real shark in financial matters. He knew how to push a business to collapse without leaving a trace. He contacted two of Nate's key partners and hinted that the company was having tax problems. These partners were very cautious people and didn't want to take any risks. They began to withdraw their investments. In the business world, such rumors spread instantly. Other clients also got nervous. Chain reaction. Panic. A few hours later, Nate called me. I heard something in his voice that I hadn't heard in a long time: fear. "Amanda, I'm in chaos here. Partners are canceling deals. They say someone leaked the audit information. It's some kind of mistake." "Oh, poor guy. Maybe it's temporary?" I asked sympathetically, while euphoria was bubbling inside me. "I don't know. I'll figure it out." He grunted nervously and hung up the phone. That wasn't enough. I had to hit harder. I already had copies of the documents about the financial frauds that I found in his safe. I wrote an anonymous letter and sent them to the IRS. Nate didn't know yet, but his company had already been put under control. The auditors were due there in a few days. I could see the panic. I could see his confidence shattering into tiny pieces. That evening, he came home late. Pale, exhausted, he hadn't even kissed the kids. He just sat on the couch, holding his head. "What happened, honey?" I asked softly. "It's been a rough day. We seem to be in big trouble. And the IRS is digging something up?" "Oh my God, you'll do it. You've always solved every problem." I smiled. I was playing the role of the perfect wife. But a wave of pleasure was beating through me. I could see the man who had despised me for so long losing control. I could see his confidence shattering. This was just the beginning. I hadn't even shown half of what I was capable of yet. I knew. He doesn't yet realize that the war has already begun. And I will win it, because this time I will not give in. This time I will prove that the housewife that he despised so much could become his worst nightmare. The next morning I woke up before anyone else. Nate was asleep, sullen and exhausted. His nerves were already starting to give out, and I was just warming up. I quietly walked into the kitchen, made coffee, and sat down at the table. In front of me was my notebook, in which I had detailed each stage of my revenge. Today it was time to move on to a new point. I decided to strike where he was most vulnerable, in his reputation among business partners and friends. To Nate, his name and status were everything. It was his shield and sword. He loved to brag about his successes, new deals, expensive purchases. I saw how he would melt into a smug smile when he talked about his new car or dinner at an elite club. His ego grew. When someone admired him, I decided to shatter this shield. I already knew that he had avoided payments on some contracts and had simply cheated several clients, taking money and delaying deadlines. I had these documents. I decided to send copies in an anonymous letter to key business partners. I added a small message to each. I advise you to check your cooperation with Nate. Some clients have already contacted lawyers. I knew that this would make them wary. The world of business is, first of all, reputation. One stain is enough, and everything that has been built for years can collapse in a matter of days. After lunch, I received the first call. Michael called. "Amanda, your wheel is spinning." I heard that 2 of the partners had already backed out of their deals with Nate. They were starting to avoid him. "Are you sure you're ready to go all the way?" "Now, just keep going," I said coldly. When Nate came back that evening, he was angry, but he tried to keep his face straight. His eyes were darting, his hands were shaking. I could tell he was panicking. I knew he'd been with Jessica today. I'd seen a transfer to her account for $5,000. She must have been demanding a new handbag or a trip. Instead of settling matters, he was once again playing the role of the rich lover. Dinner was quiet. The kids watched cartoons, and I watched him from the corner of my eye. His face was tense. He drank whiskey like water. He didn't understand that the ring around him was already narrowing, and I was sitting opposite, dressed in the same old dressing gown, and smiling, because I knew just a little bit more, and this house would become a trap for him, from which he would emerge not as a winner, but as a loser. I couldn't sleep at night. My thoughts were spinning. Am I doing the right thing? Am I taking the father away from the children? Am I destroying the family completely? But then I remembered their correspondence. I'll soon leave this fool. You're my real woman. The money spent on her. My tears at night. The emptiness in my soul.
His contempt.
I took the phone and sent another anonymous message. This time, to his main competitor. I told him that Nate's business was about to take over, and that this was the perfect time to take over his clients. I knew it would work. No one in the business world would pass up an opportunity like that. It was another nail in the coffin of his career. I lay down and closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I felt lighter. I felt strong. And that was just the beginning. The next day, I noticed something new in Nate. His irritation had given way to fear. His eyes no longer shone with confidence. His movements had become nervous. And he now never let go of the phone for a second. I saw him go out onto the balcony, whispering into someone's ear, closing the door to his office behind him, something he had never done before. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" "Yes," he muttered, but his voice betrayed panic. I knew I had my way. The circle was closing. The IRS, partners, competitors, all began to pressure him at once. And that was my job. And he still didn't suspect that the source of his downfall was the woman who made him coffee every morning. Around noon, I saw that he had left the house. "Where are you going?" "I have to meet people. Urgent. Are you okay?" "None of your business, Amanda. Give me a break." Those words should have offended me before. Now they don't. I just noted to myself, he's on the edge. And that was the signal for the next move. I took out my phone and texted Jessica. "Nate is not planning on a divorce. He's cheating on you, just like he's cheating on me. Ask him about his wife and kids. See how he gets away with it." I created a new social media account so that she wouldn't know who I was. I knew it would work. Women who have affairs with married men are always afraid of being cheated on. And I gave her reason to doubt it. I wasn't just going to ruin his career. I wanted him to lose everything. And her too. I waited in the evening. Nate came back late, blushing, nervous. I saw how he almost threw the phone on the table. Jessica must have made a scene for him. "What is it?" I asked with a pleasant smile. "Nothing. Problems at work." I knew that it was a lie. There was no longer that self-confidence in his eyes. He was afraid. His life built on lies, began to crumble like a house of cards. And I stood next to
and watched.
how my creation came to life. Later, when he fell asleep, I took his phone. The password remained the same. Our wedding day. I opened the correspondence with Jessica. Have you been lying to me all this time? Why didn't you tell me that you weren't going to leave your wife? I don't want to be your plaything. I smiled. She snapped, just as I had planned. Another blow. Another crack in his perfect life. I lay down beside him, listening to his even breathing.
He didn't know yet.
That I had already turned his life into ruins.
But he would soon understand.
And then I would leave him among these ruins, alone, with his fears and his shattered pride. The next morning I woke up before Nate. Lying next to him, I looked at him and thought that these were probably the last days, that we would still share the same bed. My plan was coming to a climax. His business was bursting at the seams. His mistress was already showering him with reproaches. And he had no idea that the enemy was sleeping next to him. I got up, made breakfast, as usual, pushed him coffee. He drank it silently, only glancing at me from the side. I could see that he no longer considered anyone an ally. He was suspicious of everyone around him. That was good. His psychological state was broken, and I took advantage of it. When he left for work, I went into our bedroom, opened the closet. All these years I had lived in the shadow of his desires. The clothes I wore were more and more like a housewife's uniform. But now I was different. I pulled out my best dress, the last one I'd worn before I had children, put on my heels, and put on a little makeup. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, I felt beautiful. I was no longer the chicken, as Nate had called me. I was a woman who knew her worth. I went to see my lawyer. It was time to take the final step. I decided to file for divorce. But not just like that. I wanted to take everything, the house, the share of the business, and most importantly, the custody of the children. I knew that the law would be on my side because I had trump cards, evidence of his betrayals, financial fraud, and even his attempts to hide his income. My lawyer was delighted. This is a perfect case. We will defeat him in court. He will be left with nothing. In the evening, I behaved. As usual, I served dinner, calmly talked about trifles. But inside, everything was boiling. I waited. When I could launch the last part of the plan. Will you be home tomorrow? I asked, pretending that it was just a side job. No, I have a lot of things to do. Why do you ask? I wanted to go to the park with the kids. Maybe we can all go together in the evening? We'll see. He waved it off, and I realized he won't come because it won't be with us, but with her. But it won't be long. The next day, I officially filed for divorce. The lawyer assured that all the documents would be handed over to Nate at the best moment, so that the blow would be unexpected. That moment came on Friday. Nate had just returned home, irritated after yet another failure at work. I met him at the door, with an envelope in his hands. What is this? Open it. He opened it and turned pale. His hands trembled. Divorce? Yes, Nate. You can't humiliate me anymore. I'll take the kids, the house, and your business. You can say goodbye to him too. He tried to say something, but I had already gone to the bedroom. I won this war. Not only had I regained my freedom, I had shown him that the housewife, whom he considered worthless, could destroy his entire life. And now, as I closed the door behind me, I didn't feel like a victor. I felt
free.
For the first time in years. After I handed Nate the divorce papers, the house fell into an oppressive silence. He sat on the couch, staring at the papers, as if he couldn't believe this was really happening. I could see his hands shaking. his once unbreakable confidence cracking in his eyes. But that didn't bother me anymore. I walked into the kitchen, made myself some tea, and went out into the garden. I breathed in the fresh air, realizing that for the first time in years, I could just sit and not feel afraid or tense. My heart no longer clenched when I heard his voice. I was no longer hostage in my own home. The next few days were like a game of silence. Nate avoided me. I avoided him. We became strangers, just living under the same roof. He still hoped that it was some kind of emotional outburst, that I would change my mind. I could see it in his eyes. But he didn't understand that I had long since left. My decision was final. One evening he tried to speak. "Amanda, maybe we shouldn't rush things? We can talk things through. I've made mistakes, but..." I cut him off. "It's too late, Nate. I don't want this life anymore. And I don't want you anymore." He clenched his jaw, and I could see his pride getting the better of him again. He didn't know how to lose, especially to a woman whom he considered his property. "Okay," he said coldly. "If that's what you want, you'll get everything according to the law. But don't expect me to just leave everything to you. This isn't the end." I just smiled. I was ready for this. I had already won. He just didn't understand it yet. At the same time, I began preparing for a new life. I went back to work. My friends helped me find a job at the agency, where I had worked before marriage. I was afraid that I had lost my skills, but the first few days showed I could still be a professional. I was no longer just Nate's wife. I became independent. I told the children that Dad and I had decided to live separately. Bella cried. Oliver tried to be strong, but I could see how it hurt him. It hurt, but I knew it was better than growing up in a house where there was no love. I promised them that we would overcome everything, and I kept that promise. I will never let anyone humiliate me again. I will be happy, and my children will be happy. And it doesn't matter anymore what happens to Nate. His time in my life is over. The next morning I woke up to a sound I hadn't heard in a long time, Nate banging on the door and muttering something loudly under his breath. His calmness, which he had tried to maintain in recent days, disappeared. I understood. He began to realize that this was not just an emotional outburst, but the real end of our marriage and his comfortable life. He ran around the house, looking for some documents, nervous, not paying attention to the children who were watching his fuss in surprise. I quietly approached him. "What are you looking for?" "It's none of your business, Amanda," he snapped, not even looking in my direction. I just smiled coldly. I knew that he was looking for business papers, which I had photographed and saved a long time ago. He thought he could still salvage something, but he didn't even suspect that I was holding all the strings in my hands. After that morning, the tension at home became even more intense. We hardly spoke, and when we met, I saw in his eyes not only anger, but also fear. He began to be afraid of me, and it was strange. This man, who had controlled me for years, was now intimidated himself, and I liked it. I understood that this was not the end. I knew that he would try to hit me back, but this time I was ready. I was no longer the intimidated wife, who kept quiet when she was humiliated. I had turned into a woman who knew how to fight and win. That evening, when the children were already asleep, he suddenly entered the bedroom, where I was packing my things. "Do you really want this?" His voice was no longer so confident. "Divorce?" "Yes, Nate, I want this."
Why?
We could have fixed everything. I looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, I felt not anger, but pity. Yes, he was a scoundrel. He betrayed me. He humiliated me. But now, this was not the confident man, but a broken, scared man. His world was falling apart, and he understood. that he had brought this upon himself. We couldn't fix anything,
Because you never valued me.
you didn't see me as a person. You saw me as a servant. Now it's over. I will never let anyone treat me like that again. He wanted to say something, but he just sighed and walked away. I heard the door to his office close behind him. I knew he would sit there until nightfall, drinking whiskey, reflecting on how everything had gone wrong. And I went to bed thinking that for the first time in years, I had chosen myself, and it was the best decision of my life. The next morning, I felt the atmosphere in the house change. It became even heavier, thicker, as if someone had opened a window and let the cold air in. Nate was no longer nervous or fussy. He was sitting in the kitchen, his face stony, drinking coffee and staring at one point. It didn't look like panic or confusion. It was something else. I understood. He had made a decision. What it was, I still had to find out. Have you decided where you're going to move? I asked calmly. Don't worry. I'll see which of us will move. His voice was quiet, but I could feel the steel in it. I knew that tone. It was the tone of a man, getting ready to strike. And I understood that the war wasn't over yet. That same day, I got a call from a lawyer, Amanda. We got a response from Nate. He filed a counterclaim. He wants to challenge the right to custody of the children and claims half of your assets.
What?
I couldn't even hide my indignation. He claims that you're a bad mother, that you're mentally unstable, and can't provide a normal upbringing for your children. I was overcome with rage. This was the lowest of all. This was no longer a fight for money or property. This was a blow to the most painful place, my motherhood. I came home, barely holding back my emotions. Nate was sitting in the living room, swiping through his phone. Did you call me mentally unstable? Someone has to tell the truth. Amanda, children need a normal father, not a mother, who takes revenge and destroys everything around them. He didn't even look up. Are you kidding? After everything, what you've done, you made me. I won't give you the children. Understand? I clenched my fists. I was shaking, but I didn't let him see it. I knew this was his last attempt to maintain control. He was losing on all fronts, so he decided to hit the children, to cause me maximum pain. At night, I sat by the window, looking at the dark sky, and thought. I couldn't let emotions control me anymore. I had to act coldly, reasonably. I had to protect my children, and I had to show Nate that even in this battle,
He wouldn't win.
I wasn't that weak woman anymore. I am a mother, and I will fight to the end. The morning began as usual. The kids were eating breakfast. Nate was sitting silently with his phone, and I was pouring myself coffee. A normal scene to the outside eye, but beneath the surface, a storm was raging. There was nothing between us anymore, except hatred and distrust. I pretended that everything was fine, smiling at the kids, asking how they were doing at school. But inside, I kept repeating to myself, hold on, Amanda. This is your war, and you have to win it. After the kids went to school, I met with the lawyer again. This time, I was even more determined. Are they playing dirty? Okay, I said. Let's show them that I can play by their rules too. Are you ready? Absolutely. We prepared documents, proving I was the main support in the family. I was engaged in the children, their upbringing, their education. I had school transcripts, confirmations from teachers. Even the neighbors were ready to confirm that Nate constantly disappeared, and I was next to the children. But the main thing is, I added evidence of his betrayals. Photos, financial transfers to his lover, recorded phone conversations. I prepared everything so that in court his reputation would be completely destroyed. I left him no chance. When I returned home, Nate was there. He was sitting in his office, But this time his face was no longer so confident.
I saw that.
He felt that he was losing. He tried to play strong, but inside he was already crumbling. And what, Amanda? Will you fight to the end? To the end, Nate. I won't stop. I said it openly for the first time. I no longer hid my intentions. I was no longer afraid, and I saw the fear in his eyes. That night I sat in the room with the children, reading them a book before bed. Oliver put his arm around me and asked quietly,
Mom,
"Are you not going to cry at night anymore?" I froze. He heard. All these years he had seen everything. He had felt everything. "No, son, I will never cry again. I promise." Those words became my oath. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for them. And I will never lose again. Never. The day of the trial had come. I woke up before dawn. The house was quiet, except for the even breathing of the children in the next room. I went to the mirror, looked at myself. A completely different woman stood before me. Not the tired wife, who had endured for years. I was strong, confident. I was going to defend my life, my children, my freedom. I put on a restrained, but elegant suit. Makeup was minimal. I wanted to show myself in court as a stable, mature woman who knew what she wanted. Nate was sitting in the kitchen, gloomy, silent. His suit, which had once symbolized success,
now hung on him
like someone else's. His face was tired. His eyes were red. I could see how fear was eating at him from the inside. But I didn't care. We sat on opposite sides of the courtroom. Nate tried to look confident, but his palms were rubbing together nervously. His lawyer was whispering something to him quickly, but he was barely listening. I was sitting still, like a rock. The judge was reviewing the documents, listening to the arguments of both sides. And when my lawyer began to lay out the facts, evidence of infidelity, financial fraud, neglect of family responsibilities on the part of Nate, I could see his confidence finally crumbling. When the amounts he had spent on his mistress were announced, everyone in the courtroom looked at each other. Even the judge raised an eyebrow. Nate lowered his head.
He knew it was the end.
The decision was made quickly. I got custody of the children. The house was mine, plus financial compensation, and some of the business assets. Nate was devastated. His career was ruined. His reputation was tarnished. And most importantly, he had lost control.
Control over me.
Control over his life. When he left the courtroom, he didn't even look in my direction.
He just walked away,
quickly with his head bowed. I watched him go and felt not joy, not triumph. I felt relief. Finally, I was free. I went home, took the children, hugged them tightly. "We're going to be okay," I said quietly. "I promise." That night, the three of us had dinner. We laughed, joked, made plans for the future. And I realized this wasn't just the end of the war. This was the beginning of a new life. A life where I would never let anyone deprive me of happiness again. A few weeks had passed since the trial. The house was filled with new energy. The children's laughter became more frequent, and I felt the weight of the past gradually lifting from my shoulders. I no longer woke up in the middle of the night from anxious thoughts. I didn't listen to every sound in the house, for fear of Nate's next outburst of anger. I was home, in a real house, where I was the mistress, where I decided what tomorrow would be like. But despite this, the shadows still remained. I knew that Nate had not simply disappeared. I had heard from mutual acquaintances that his business had completely collapsed. When his partners found out about the trial, they refused to work with him. Jessica, his lover, left him as soon as she smelled financial problems. He was left alone, in a small rented apartment, on the other side of town. And it seemed to me that this was not the end. One evening I was coming home from work. It was already late. The kids were at their mother's, and I finally had time to be alone with myself for a while. But as I approached the house, I saw a familiar figure at the gate.
Nate.
Gloomy, haggard, with a bottle in his hand. I stopped a few steps away. "What are you doing here?" "I just wanted to talk, Amanda. I messed up. I know." I wanted to apologize. His voice was drunk, but not aggressive. More like broken. It was the first time I had seen him so helpless. "You've already done everything you could. What more do you need?" I wanted to say that I'm sorry. I lost everything, and I understand that you were the best thing that ever happened to me. I didn't answer. I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel sympathy either. I just looked at a person who had destroyed himself, and I knew that it wasn't my problem anymore. Go, Nate. You had your family, your chance. You lost it, and I'm not yours anymore. I turned and walked into the house, leaving him standing in the darkness. I closed the door, leaning my back against it, and then a wave of emotions washed over me. I cried, not out of pity for him, but out of relief. I finally closed this page. The next morning I woke up with a sense of freedom that I had never felt before. I looked in the mirror. There stood a new Amanda in front of me.
Strong. Free.
A woman who had been through hell and become even stronger. And I knew only the best awaited me. I was no longer a victim. I was a winner, and I was ready for a new life. A month passed. Life gradually entered a new direction. I finally arranged the house the way I had always dreamed. I got rid of everything that reminded me of Nate. His chairs, suits, even the cups he loved, disappeared. I bought new furniture, hung light curtains. Now it was my home. A home where peace reigned. A home where there was no place for fear.
The children also changed.
Bella began to smile more, hug me more often. Oliver began to be interested in sports. We went to training together. I saw. They felt the difference. They no longer lived in tension, did not expect screams and scandals. They became happier. And this was my greatest victory. One day I received a letter from Nate. I opened the envelope with a slight trepidation. Inside was a short message. "Amanda, I understand everything. I will no longer interfere in your life. I am leaving town. Thank you for the years that we were together. I am sorry that it all ended this way. Take care of the children and yourself.
Goodbye,
Nate." I reread it several times. It was like a final period. I felt a strange relief. Maybe he had finally found peace too, or at least accepted everything as it was. I burned this letter in the fireplace. With it, all the remnants of pain, resentment, and fear burned. That evening I went out into the garden. The children were already asleep. I stood under the starry sky, feeling the wind gently touch my face. I took a deep breath and smiled. A new life lay ahead, a life that I was creating myself, for my children. I will never let anyone take this happiness from me again. I will never be weak again, because now I know I am strong, and this strength will stay with me forever.
The end.
Please subscribe to our channel Stellar Stories. We have new amazing stories coming out every day. Thank you.